Well, can you believe it? It is Thanksgiving week. Wildlife Banquet is tonight. Thanksgiving is Thursday, or as my stomach likes to call it, the most wonderful week of the year. Maybe you feel that way too. I read this week something that surprised me, a statistic I wanted to share with you. We'll see how you respond to it. 80% of men, 80% now say, that they help make Thanksgiving dinner. 80% of men now say they help with Thanksgiving dinner. It's true, 80% of men now say that, which is not surprising because those same 80% of men also say that saying it smells good is very helpful. So men, make sure and say it smells good this week. But in the spirit of Thanksgiving, I want us to take a look at one of the stories in the Bible that focuses on eating. You just heard Stephen read a portion of the 21st chapter of John, which takes place, you may remember, in a very important moment. The context of this story is significant because it happens immediately after the resurrection. That's right, the most important event in the history of the world. And how do Peter and 6 other disciples decide to celebrate? They go fishing, which for some of you sounds just about right. It's hot outside, you want to go fishing. It's cold outside, you want to go fishing. A hurricane is on the way tomorrow. Heck, go fishing. And in this case, the resurrection has come and gone, so let's go fishing. But unlike you and me, or at least those of us in this room that maybe love to fish so much that you'll take that opportunity any chance you get, for Peter and the 6 other men, it probably meant something different. For these men, going fishing was not simply a relaxing getaway. This just wasn't a hobby or a pastime. It is what they had done for a living, at least what they did before Jesus showed up and called them to follow him. A lot of people have speculated over the years why they did this. Truth is, John doesn't tell us, so we don't know for sure. You'd think that something as big and amazing as the resurrection would grab their attention. But maybe that's the problem. Maybe what had happened was so big they didn't know what to do with it. What do you do when something is overwhelming, when you don't know what to do? A lot of times I go back to what I know. And so they go back to what they do know, and what they do know how to do is fish. So they go back to work, back to the old familiar patterns, back to the old familiar pre-Easter world, back to the world the way that it was and they probably thought was always going to be. But when they do, what happened? Nothing. Here are these professional fishermen. They know what they're doing. They've done it thousands of times before. They get in the boat, they go out into the water, they cast their nets in, and John tells us that all night long they fished and nothing. Not even one. Not even one fish. Finally, the sun rises, and when it does, there is a man standing on the shore. Now, the man first asks if they've caught anything. Well, if you've ever seen the kind of boats that they use on the Sea of Galilee, you know that the ends are very high, but in the middle the sides come down very low, so really a pretty good idea that whoever would be standing on the shore would be able to tell almost immediately that they had caught him. And so, when that man on the shore asks that question, put yourself in the shoes of those men in the boat. They've been out there all night long trying to catch fish, and they haven't caught one. And so when he says, hey, you caught anything yet? It almost inevitably sounded like a dig. And then when they respond back, no, he gives them some advice. Now, I don't know about you, but when I'm good at something, but in that particular moment I'm failing at that thing that I'm good at, the absolute last thing in the world I want is for somebody to tell me how to do it better. Which is exactly what this man on the shore does. Hey, throw your nets on the other side of the boat. Oh, yeah, thanks a lot for the advice. We've been casting our nets all over the place all night long, and we haven't caught a thing. And the way that John tells his story, as often happens in the gospel, the gospel writers, they don't give us every single minute of what takes place. The way John writes his gospel is they did it instantly. But as far as we know, who knows how long it took. Between the time the man on the shore who gives them that advice and the time that they actually cast their nets on the other side. And the way it works in my mind, that's not at all what they do. They're grumbling. They're complaining. Oh, who does this guy think he is? But finally, maybe because they have no other choice, they take his advice and they cast those nets into the other side, to the other side of the boat. And when they do, suddenly the net becomes so full of fish that they can barely haul it in. Finally, one of the disciples recognizes the man who has been giving them advice. It is the Lord, he says. Now, when you read the Gospels and you get to the end of each gospel story, one of the things that you start to recognize is that when Jesus shows up on the other side of the empty tomb, for some unexplained reason, he is almost always hard to recognize. Why do you think that is? Does resurrection make your ears grow or your nose get smaller? Does it change your hair color? I don't know. I've never been resurrected. Or is it possible it's because God is trying to teach those men a lesson? Maybe Jesus thinks a skill his followers need to develop is to be able to spot him, to learn to see him not with just their physical eyes, but with eyes of faith. Jesus, you see, is popping up in some unexpected places in those days. And he's going to be popping up in all kinds of different places in the future, many of them unexpected. Maybe Jesus thinks his followers need to learn to spot him in those places. Maybe he thinks that of us, too. As a preacher, it kind of pains me to say this, since I spend so much time and effort getting ready for Sunday. But what I think that means is that the risen Christ won't always need us in the ways that we would expect. He won't always look like we expect him to look, might not even be doing what we expect him to do. The risen Christ might not even show up for us on a Sunday in worship. It could just as easily be on Monday when we are at work or doing laundry or buying groceries, or it could be on Tuesday when Jesus shows up asking for a meal because he's hungry, or it might be on Saturday. I hear Jesus' house got damaged in the hurricane and he might need our help mucking it out. Regardless, we need to pay attention because we wouldn't want to miss him when he appears. Which is at least one of the reasons, I think, why Jesus shows up on the beach that morning and makes breakfast for his disciples. After they eat, he asks Simon Peter a question. Simon, do you love me? Peter responds quickly and easily, Lord, you know that I love you. But that's not enough for Jesus. Feed my lambs, he says. Then he does something strange. He asks the question again, Simon, do you love me? Yes, Lord, says Peter, perplexed this time to get the exact same question. And again, Peter's answer is not quite enough. Take care of my sheep, says Jesus. And then a third time, he asks the question again, do you love me, Peter? And now Peter is hurt because Jesus asks the question again, and I understand why he is hurt. I probably would be too. You may remember that just a few days before this, Peter had an opportunity 3 different times to associate himself with Jesus. And 3 times he fails to do so. In his fear, he denies Jesus because he's afraid of what it will mean. But if we think that Jesus is trying to scold Peter for denying him 3 times by asking him 3 times if Peter loves him, then I think we are missing the point. Jesus has already forgiven Peter. He forgave all of us on the cross. That's already been established. No, now what Jesus is doing is reminding him of his calling. And when you think about it, that is far more challenging. I mean, it's pretty easy to love Jesus, isn't it? I mean, he died on the cross for us. When someone's willing to die for you, that makes loving them pretty easy. But Jesus isn't just asking us to love him. He's also asking us to feed his sheep. That's the hard part. He's asking us to love that coworker who gets on our nerves. He's asking us to love that family member whose words and actions caused us great pain. He's asking us to love those neighbors down the street who put signs in their yard for the people that we voted against. He's asking us to do more than just hand a $5 bill to the homeless guy we pass on the street, but to actually get to know him and become his friend. He's asking us to welcome that refugee from a foreign country who doesn't speak English very well, but could really use our wisdom and knowledge. He's asking us to feed the hungry and visit the inmates, welcome the stranger, and bring hope to families whose lives have been devastated by hurricanes. And that's a lot. It is. It's a lot. And in fact, on our own, if we're honest, it's probably impossible. Except for the fact we're not at all on our own. See, Jesus tells Peter, feed my sheep, right after he does what? After he fixes him breakfast. Breakfast of so many fish, they couldn't even get him in the boat. You know, it's easy for us, if we're not careful, to think that it's all on us. We sit down and we make our calculus about what we can do. Whether it's the money we give or the love that we share, it's all on our shoulders. I have got to meet that need. All the while forgetting that just a short time ago, Jesus already fixed fix me breakfast with more fish than I could possibly eat in a lifetime. Or in the words of one of my favorite preachers, one moment it all looks hopeless to you, and the next you see possibilities that you never saw before. One moment your problems look too big to be budged, and the next you discover handles on them you never knew were there. One moment the net looks empty, and the next it does not. You discover life where there was nothing but darkness and death before. And in those moments, we realize it is the Lord. And that's where our call to love our neighbors begins, including the way we love our neighbors by what we give. In just a few moments, you're going to be given an opportunity to make a commitment, to give. Not just of your financial resources, but of your life, of every part of you that God wants to use to be a blessing to other people. Truth is, most of us, not all of us, but most of us in this room, our lives are so filled with God's abundance. There's more than enough. 153 fish worth. More than enough. You and I have come through a challenging moment in the history of this community. And I can tell you, literally less than a mile from where we sit right now, there are people who don't know how they are going to feed their families in the coming weeks. There are people who are within just a few miles of where we now sit, who don't know where they're going to take their family for shelter. There was another apartment complex this week in our city that got condemned. And 50 families were told earlier this week, we're sorry, you're going to have to find a new place to live, but the only problem is all the apartments are already taken, because so many got damaged in the storm. And the opportunity that's in front of us is to recognize that, well, God is calling us to feed those sheep, why God is calling us to take care of those lambs, why God is calling us to love those neighbors. He's doing it after He's already given us what we need to meet those needs. Tell you a story. A friend of mine named Will is a pastor in Georgia. Will is the youngest cousin in a large family. And every year, one of his favorite things to do was to go to his grandmother's house for Thanksgiving. His whole extended family would get together. A lot of you have gatherings like that. You know exactly how much fun that is. And because he was the youngest by several years, actually, at the end of dinner every Thanksgiving, his grandmother, who loved her youngest grandchild in some unique and special ways, would always kind of protect him a little bit, make sure that his older cousins didn't take advantage of him. And so she said, you save that last piece of pumpkin pie for Will. Will loved his grandmother's pumpkin pie. And so every year he would show up for Thanksgiving, and every year his grandmother would tell all the other cousins, you save that last piece of pumpkin pie for Will. And he was so excited. He felt so loved that his grandmother would take care of him that way. Well, when he got to be a teenager, finally his older brother had just about had enough of it. And so he was trying to figure out a way to get his revenge. And so later that afternoon, after he got the last piece of pumpkin pie, yet again, he pulled Will aside. He said, do you know how much Grandma loves pumpkin pie? And every year, you take the last piece. Will felt terrible that all these years he had been had taken pumpkin pie out of his grandmother's mouth. And so he went in and he found his grandmother in the kitchen and he started to apologize. He said, "Grandma, I'm so sorry." Tear in his eye. I didn't know that you love pumpkin pie as much as I do. I'm so sorry. And immediately she started to laugh. She said, "No." In a whisper, "Come here." And she walked over to the pantry and she opened up the door, and there was an entirely untouched pumpkin pie in the pantry. She said, "Well, I'm the cook. Don't you worry. In my house, there will always be enough pumpkin pie." Folks, this is God's world. And in God's world, there's always enough. Always enough money. Always enough fish. Always enough love. Always enough pumpkin pie. God has already given us everything we need to make sure that everybody gets to come to the table. That every need can be met. So don't be afraid. Don't try to protect that last piece of pie. Give sacrificially, audaciously. Give. Jesus has already shown us where to cast our nets. Give. Are you hungry? That's okay. You can still share some because Jesus just made breakfast for all of us. Every single lamb and sheep. Everyone, always, regardless. There's enough for everybody at God's table. Would you pray with me? Father, help us to believe that and act accordingly. Help us to remember all of the times that you blessed us, so that in turn, we'll be ready to bless someone else. It's all these things I ask in Christ's name. Amen.